He replaced my name with his sister's on the company site. Vanessa's better at posing than planning, they joked. In meetings, his sister ordered me to take notes and serve snacks to everyone, adding, "It's the only way you'll contribute here." I smiled through it all, until the boardroom seats rearranged. "Could you grab more napkins from the supply closet?" Isabel's voice cut through the conference room chatter like a blade. "And maybe some of those little cream cheese sandwiches? The ones you made last time were actually decent." I stood frozen by the door, my strategic analysis folder clutched against my chest like armor. 20 executives, people who used to seek my advice, who used to nod respectfully at my presentations, now avoided eye contact as whispers rippled through the room. Someone actually snickered. 6 months ago I would have been leading this meeting. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Richard's weathered hands spreading my market expansion proposal across this very table, his eyes lighting up with genuine excitement. "This is revolutionary thinking," he'd said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years building this empire. "Vanessa, you've just solved our biggest challenge." That was then. That was when I mattered. Now I was the coffee girl. "The sandwiches?" Isabel repeated, her tone suggesting I was mentally deficient. A few people chuckled, the kind of nervous laughter that accompanies public humiliation. My cheeks burned as I backed toward the door, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to my own execution. But let me tell you how intoxicating those first 6 months had been, because the fall hurts so much more when you remember the height. Before Richard died, I was untouchable. I remember the exact moment I knew I belonged in this world. It was during my 3rd week at Morrison & Associates, barely 2 months after marrying Cole. The quarterly board meeting had devolved into heated arguments about our stagnating Southeast division, millions in revenue bleeding away while competitors swooped in like vultures. Richard sat at the head of the massive conference table, his silver hair catching the afternoon light as veteran executives pitched increasingly desperate solutions. Each proposal was more conservative than the last, patching holes instead of rebuilding the ship. "What do you think, Vanessa?" His question silenced the room like a judge's gavel. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, some curious, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. These were men who'd built careers on playing it safe, who viewed innovation as a dirty word. I was 28 years old, female, and according to their whispered assumptions, only there because I'd married the boss's son. I stood slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We're trying to save a sinking division instead of building a new ship," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The Southeast isn't failing because we're doing something wrong. It's failing because we're doing the right things for the wrong decade." The silence stretched until Richard leaned forward. "Continue." For the next 20 minutes, I dismantled our traditional approach piece by piece. I presented data they'd ignored, demographic shifts they'd missed, technological opportunities they'd dismissed as fads. I painted a picture of complete strategic overhaul, risky, expensive, and absolutely necessary. When I finished, Richard's smile could have powered the building. "Gentlemen, this is what leadership looks like. Bold vision backed by solid research." He turned to his son. "Cole, you picked well. That single moment changed everything." Suddenly, my opinions carried weight. Project managers scheduled meetings around my availability. Department heads sought my approval before implementing changes. Richard began introducing me at industry events not as Cole's wife, but as our strategic planning director, the brightest mind in the room. My office became a pilgrimage site. Senior executives would knock tentatively, asking if I had just a minute to review their proposals. I'd find myself mediating disputes between department heads, my recommendations treated like gospel. "Dad calls you the company's secret weapon," Cole told me one evening, his pride radiating like warmth from a fireplace. We were in his apartment, our apartment now, overlooking the city lights. He'd just returned from a client dinner where Richard had apparently spent 20 minutes praising my latest cost optimization strategy. Even Isabel, typically frosty toward outsiders, began including me in family discussions. She'd mention upcoming board retreats or family traditions with casual assumption of my permanent place. "The annual shareholders meeting is always stressful," she'd said once, "but having another strategic mind in the family will help." Richard made it official during our 6-month wedding anniversary dinner. The extended family had gathered at his estate. Aunts, uncles, Cousins who'd never paid attention to me before suddenly hanging on my every word about market trends and investment opportunities. "I have an announcement," Richard said, rising from the head of the table with his wine glass raised. "Vanessa has single-handedly turned around our Southeast operations. Revenue is up 43% in 6 months. She's not just joining our family, she's securing our future." The applause felt like validation, like finally proving I belonged in rooms where decisions affecting thousands of lives were made over dessert and vintage wine. Those months sparkled with possibility. Richard would pull me aside after Sunday dinners, discussing succession plans with the seriousness of a military strategist. "I won't live forever," he'd say, his weathered hands gesturing toward family photos spanning generations. "This company needs leaders who understand both tradition and innovation. You get that balance." I felt invincible, untouchable, like I was building something permanent. Then Richard collapsed during his morning jog on a Tuesday in March, and my world shattered like glass hitting concrete. The funeral was a blur of black suits and sympathetic handshakes, but the will reading cut through grief like cold steel. Cole inherited 40%. Isabel received 40%. 20% went to employees and charity. My name wasn't mentioned. That's when the dream ended and the nightmare began. Standing in that conference room now, clutching my ignored analysis while being asked to fetch sandwiches, I understood exactly how far I'd fallen. From strategic director to catering staff in 3 months. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They thought humiliation would break me. Instead, it was about to forge me into something far more dangerous than they could imagine. The coffee request came exactly 31 days after Richard's funeral. I know because I'd been counting, not the days since his death, but the days since my last meaningful contribution to a board meeting. The precision of their timing wasn't coincidental. "Vanessa, darling." Isabel's voice dripped honey-coated venom as she intercepted me in the hallway outside the executive conference room. "Could you be an absolute angel and handle refreshments today? Martha called in sick and we're expecting some important clients." Martha, the 60-year-old administrative assistant who'd been fetching coffee for executives since before I was born. The same woman who used to address me as Ms. Morrison and ask permission before entering my office. "I was actually preparing for the presentation on the Johnson acquisition," I replied, gesturing toward the leather portfolio in my hands. 3 weeks of research distilled into 47 slides that could save the company millions. Isabel's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Oh, sweetie, Cole's handling that now. We simplified the approach. Sometimes less is more, you know." Her manicured fingers touched my arm with practiced sympathy. "It's just coffee, Vanessa. No need to take it so seriously." The conference room doors were already closed when I returned with the silver service tray. Through the frosted glass, I could see Cole's silhouette at the head of the table. My table where I'd once commanded respect with data-driven strategies and innovative solutions. Now I was balancing cream and sugar like a waitress at a roadside diner. When I knocked, the conversation stopped abruptly. Cole opened the door with an expression I'd never seen before. Embarrassment mixed with something darker. Pity perhaps. Or guilt. "Just set it on the side table," he whispered, avoiding eye contact. "Thanks, honey." Honey. In front of clients who used to shake my hand and call me by my professional title. The diminutive hit like a slap, reducing me from strategic partner to domestic accessory in 3 syllables. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and retreated, my heels clicking against marble floors that had once announced my arrival with authority. Now they just counted down my escape. 2 weeks later, the office eviction notice came disguised as downsizing efficiency. "We're consolidating departments," Cole explained over breakfast, his eyes fixed on his phone screen instead of my face. "Your space is needed for the new marketing team." My space. The corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The mahogany desk where I'd crafted strategies that generated millions in revenue. The bookshelf lined with industry publications I'd contributed to, my nameplate still gleaming on the door. Where am I supposed to work? The question sounded pathetic even to my own ears. From home mostly. You can always use the hot desk in the lobby when you need to come in. He finally looked up, his expression carefully neutral. It's more flexible this way. Better work-life balance. Work-life balance. The corporate euphemism for making someone irrelevant without technically firing them. That afternoon, I packed my personal belongings into 3 cardboard boxes while cleaning staff waited impatiently to begin the renovation. My diplomas, industry awards, family photos. The physical evidence of my professional identity reduced to items small enough to carry to my car in one trip. The new occupant moved in the next morning. Some kid fresh out of business school with perfectly styled hair and an eager smile. I watched from the lobby as maintenance workers removed my nameplate and installed his, the brass gleaming like a beacon of my replacement. Home became my prison. Cole would leave each morning with his leather briefcase and return each evening with stories I wasn't part of. Client meetings I'd once dominated. Strategic decisions I'd once influenced. Board discussions that happened in rooms I was no longer invited to enter. "How was your day?" became our hollow evening ritual. "Productive," he'd answer, already reaching for his laptop. "Lots of moving pieces right now. You know how it is." Except I didn't know anymore. I wasn't part of the machine I'd helped build. The business conversations we'd once shared over dinner disappeared entirely. When I'd ask about ongoing projects or offer insights based on news articles I'd read, Cole would nod politely and change the subject to weekend plans or home renovation ideas. "Let's keep work at work," he'd say with forced cheerfulness. "You deserve to relax." Relax. As if my career had been a burden I should be grateful to abandon. The website discovery happened on a Thursday morning while I was researching industry trends, trying to stay current despite my forced exile from relevance. I'd navigated to Morrison & Associates' homepage to check our latest press releases when the leadership page loaded with surgical precision. Richard Morrison, founder, 1952 to 2024. His memorial photo gazed out with the same steely determination that had built an empire. Cole Morrison, Chief Executive Officer. His professional headshot radiated confident authority I'd helped him develop. Isabel Morrison, Co-Chief Executive Officer. The title that should have been mine, displayed in elegant serif font beneath her perfectly composed portrait. I scrolled frantically, searching for my name anywhere on the site. Strategic Planning Director. Senior Advisor. Even a mention in the company history section acknowledging my contributions to recent growth. Nothing. Not even a footnote. 6 months of revolutionary strategies, millions in additional revenue, industry recognition for innovative approaches. All of it erased as if I'd never existed. The company's digital memory had been scrubbed clean of my professional DNA. My hands trembled as I screenshot the evidence, though I wasn't sure why. Perhaps documentation of my own disappearance. Perhaps proof that I hadn't imagined the respect I'd once commanded. Cole found me that evening sitting in his study, our study, staring at the computer screen with the website still open. "You saw it," he said quietly. Not a question but a statement of inevitable discovery. "When were you planning to mention this?" My voice sounded foreign, hollow. He sat heavily in the leather chair across from me, suddenly looking older than his 32 years. "Isabel thought it would be easier this way. Clean transition. No confusion about leadership structure." "No confusion," I repeated slowly. "About erasing me completely. You're still family, Vanessa. You're still my wife. That's what matters." But it wasn't what mattered. Not to me. Not anymore. That night, I lay awake listening to Cole's steady breathing beside me, understanding with crystal clarity that this was just the beginning. The coffee requests, the office eviction, the website erasure. These weren't random acts of post-grief reorganization. They were systematic dismantling. And tomorrow I would begin documenting every single piece. The documentation began with a simple notebook. Black leather, unremarkable, purchased from the drugstore on 5th Street. Each morning, I recorded interactions, conversations, glances that lingered too long on my humiliation. What started as evidence collection became my lifeline to sanity. The team lunch happened on a Tuesday in June, exactly 3 months and 4 days after Richard's funeral. Not that anyone was counting except me. The entire senior staff had gathered at Marcello's, the upscale Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated major contract wins back when my presence at such events was assumed rather than questioned. 23 people around a long table, the kind of power lunch where million-dollar decisions got made between appetizers and dessert. I'd dressed carefully that morning. My navy Armani suit, the one Richard had complimented during my first board presentation. "You look like someone who means business," he'd said, his approval warming me like sunlight. The memory felt like touching a bruise as I straightened my blazer and entered the restaurant. The seating arrangement spoke volumes. Cole at the head, Isabel to his right in the position I'd once occupied. I found myself relegated to the far end, squeezed between two junior associates who kept checking their phones instead of acknowledging my existence. Conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. Market projections, client acquisitions, strategic partnerships. All topics I could have contributed to, should have been leading. Instead, I sat silent, invisible, my expertise treated as irrelevant as yesterday's newspaper. The Peterson account needs delicate handling, Cole was saying, his voice carrying the authority he'd learned from his father. Their concerns about our project timeline are valid, but manageable. I knew Peterson Industries intimately. Had spent weeks analyzing their operational bottlenecks, crafting solutions that addressed their core inefficiencies. My fingers twitched toward my phone, where I'd stored detailed notes that could resolve their timeline concerns in minutes. But nobody asked. Halfway through the entrees, Isabel's voice cut through the dining room chatter like a blade through silk. "Vanessa, darling, would you mind taking notes on the feedback we're getting? And maybe clearing some of these empty plates? The server seems overwhelmed." The table fell silent with surgical precision. 22 pairs of eyes turned toward me, some curious, others embarrassed, a few openly amused. The kind of silence that follows a car accident when everyone stops to stare at the wreckage. My pen froze above the notepad I'd been using to track talking points, not feedback. Not kitchen duties. Strategic insights that would never see daylight because my voice had been systematically silenced. Of course, I heard myself saying the words tasting like ash. I began stacking empty appetizer plates with hands that trembled just slightly, barely noticeable unless someone was watching closely. Marcus Fitzgerald, the operations director who'd once sought my advice on supply chain optimization, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Actually, I think the server can handle." No, Isabel interrupted with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Vanessa doesn't mind. She's always been so helpful with the little details." Little details. My strategic analysis reduced to housekeeping tasks while men who'd once respected my expertise averted their eyes in secondhand embarrassment. The laughter started with Jennifer from accounting, a nervous giggle that spread like infection around the table. Not malicious, exactly, but complicit in its discomfort. The sound of people choosing sides, and I wasn't on the winning team. I finished clearing plates while conversation resumed around me, their voices deliberately louder to cover the awkwardness of my degradation. My cheeks burned with humiliation so intense it felt physical, like standing too close to a fire. Something inside me crystallized in that moment. Not broke, crystallized. Like carbon under pressure becoming diamond. Hard. Unbreakable. The drive home passed in a blur of rage and planning. Cole was already in his study when I arrived, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear, discussing quarterly projections with someone whose opinion apparently mattered more than his wife's. I waited until he finished the call, until he looked up with that expression of mild irritation he'd developed whenever I interrupted his work. "We need to talk about what happened today," he sighed, the sound of someone dealing with an inconvenient child. "The lunch? What about it? Your sister asked me to clear tables in front of the entire senior staff. Isabel was just trying to help the server." "You're overthinking this, Vanessa." He turned back to his laptop, fingers already moving across the keyboard. "Maybe this kind of supportive role actually suits you better. Not everything has to be about power plays and corporate politics." The words hit like physical blows. Supportive role. As if my MBA, my industry expertise, my proven track record meant nothing compared to my willingness to stack dirty dishes. Suits me better than what? Than the job I was hired for? Than the strategies that saved this company millions? "Look," he said, finally giving me his full attention with obvious reluctance. "Dad's gone. The company structure has changed. We're all adjusting to new realities." New realities. Where I fetched coffee and cleared tables while men with half my qualifications made decisions that would have benefited from my input. The conversation ended there, but the documentation continued. Every slight, every dismissal, every moment they treated me like hired help instead of family business leadership. The apron arrived 3 days later. Pristine white cotton with the Morrison & Associates logo embroidered in navy thread. The accompanying note, written in Isabel's perfect penmanship, felt like a dagger wrapped in ribbon. For the woman who keeps the company kitchen running smoothly. Your dedication to the details doesn't go unnoticed. I stood in my kitchen, our kitchen, holding this symbol of my complete professional annihilation. Not fired. Not laid off. Simply reclassified as domestic staff in the empire I'd helped build. The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. They couldn't legally terminate me without cause, and my marriage to Cole complicated any direct confrontation. So they'd chosen psychological warfare instead, systematically destroying my professional identity through public humiliation. They wanted me to quit. To walk away voluntarily, saving them the messiness of explanations or severance packages. To disappear quietly while they rewrote company history without my contributions. That night I sat at my laptop researching employment lawyers, corporate harassment policies, constructive dismissal cases. But legal remedies felt inadequate for the scope of their betrayal. They'd taken my career, my dignity, my place in the family business. Laws couldn't restore what they'd stolen. But strategy could. And if there was one thing they'd underestimated about me, it was my capacity for long-term strategic thinking. They saw weakness in my silence, compliance in my documentation. They were about to learn the difference between surrender and preparation. The phone call to Marcus Chin happened at 11:47 p.m., long after Cole had fallen asleep beside me. I sat in our walk-in closet with the door closed, my voice barely above a whisper as I dialed the number I'd memorized but never thought I'd need. Vanessa. Marcus's voice carried genuine surprise despite the late hour. It's been 3 years? Marcus and I had been study partners at Wharton, the kind of intellectual sparring that forged unbreakable bonds. While classmates networked at campus mixers, we'd dissected hostile takeover strategies over midnight coffee, dreaming of the day we'd reshape corporate America. Now he ran Meridian Capital, a boutique private equity firm with a reputation for surgical precision in complex acquisitions. I need to understand something about share acquisition structures, I said, skipping pleasantries entirely. Hypothetically. His pause stretched long enough for me to hear papers shuffling in the background. Marcus never slept, a trait that had served him well in the predatory world of corporate finance. What kind of hypothetical are we talking about? The kind involving family businesses, dispersed shareholding and maintaining anonymity during accumulation. Another pause, this one calculating. Are you looking to acquire or defend? Acquire. Timeline. 6 to 12 months. Maybe longer if necessary. Budget. I gave him a number that represented everything. My inheritance from my grandmother, my personal savings, even the emergency fund Cole and I had built together. Money that could buy a house, fund a comfortable retirement, secure a different future entirely. That's serious money, Vanessa. Serious enough to change outcomes. His voice shifted into business mode, the warmth replaced by sharp focus. I can structure something through layered entities. Shell companies within holding firms within investment vehicles. Clean, legal, invisible until you want visibility. How invisible? Your target won't know you exist until you control their board meetings. We talked for another hour, Marcus explaining the mechanics of stealth acquisition while I took notes in a shorthand I'd developed during business school. Bearer shares, nominee directors, offshore structures that existed in legal gray areas designed for exactly this purpose. One question, he said before hanging up. This target. Do they know you're capable of this level of strategic thinking? I glanced toward the bedroom where Cole slept peacefully, unaware that his wife was plotting corporate warfare from their shared closet. They think I make good coffee. Marcus's laugh carried genuine admiration. Then they're about to get educated. The first purchase happened 2 weeks later through Cayman Holdings LLC. A shell entity so obscure it existed only on paper in a lawyer's office in Georgetown. 5,000 shares of Morrison & Associates, purchased from a retiring board member who'd served alongside Richard for 20 years. The seller, Harold Brennan, had called Cole directly to offer the shares as a courtesy. Cole declined, too busy with day-to-day operations to worry about minor shareholding adjustments. The missed opportunity represented 2.3% of total company ownership. My ownership. I watched Cole's face during the family dinner where Harold mentioned the sale, searching for any recognition of the strategic error. Nothing. Just polite interest and a comment about hoping the buyer would be aligned with company values. If only he knew. The second acquisition came through Trinity Investment Partners, another Marcus creation that existed solely to disguise my activities. This time, 8,000 shares from a pension fund liquidating its portfolio. Cole never heard about this sale. It happened through private broker networks where individual transactions disappeared into quarterly reports. By month 3, I owned 11% of Morrison & Associates through 6 different entities across 4 jurisdictions. Cole and Isabel remained blissfully ignorant, too focused on their public rebranding campaign to notice the quiet reshuffling of power happening in financial shadows. The rebranding had started subtly. New letterhead featuring C&I Morrison leadership in elegant script. Marketing materials emphasizing the sibling synergy, driving company innovation. Cole's business cards now read Chief Executive Officer in larger font, while Isabel had upgraded her title to Chief Operating Officer, despite never having operated anything more complex than a charity gala. They commissioned a documentary crew to film their leadership transition journey, spending thousands on professional lighting and makeup artists to capture their vision for the company's future. I watched from the sidelines as they rehearsed sound bites about honoring their father's legacy while embracing new perspectives. New perspectives that apparently didn't include the woman who generated 40% of their recent revenue growth. During these filming sessions, I perfected my invisibility. Sitting quietly in corners, notepad balanced on my knee, documenting every grandiose claim and factual inaccuracy. They spoke about innovations I'd developed as if they'd conceived them personally. They described strategic victories I'd orchestrated as examples of their natural business instincts. The cameras loved them. Cole's earnest determination, Isabel's polished confidence. They projected exactly the kind of photogenic leadership that impressed investors and clients. Meanwhile, I recorded their lies in careful shorthand, building a file that would prove devastating when the right moment arrived. Vanessa's been such a supportive presence during this transition, Isabel told the documentary director during one particularly nauseating interview. She understands that leadership sometimes means stepping back and letting others shine. I smiled and nodded from my corner chair, playing the supportive family member while calculating exactly how much her condescension would cost when I controlled her paycheck. Month 5 brought my biggest acquisition yet, 22,000 shares from the Morrison Family Trust, a legacy holding that Richard's sister had inherited but never understood. She lived in Florida now, more interested in golf tournaments than board meetings, and Marcus had convinced her to liquidate for tax advantages. Cole signed off on the sale without reading the paperwork, trusting his aunt's financial advisor to handle the details. Another strategic blindness that transferred 12% company ownership directly into my hidden portfolio. I was approaching critical mass, but the final push required patience. The remaining shares belonged to longtime employees, board members with sentimental attachments, and family friends who viewed their holdings as legacy investments rather than financial instruments. These acquisitions demanded personal relationships, careful cultivation, strategic timing. I began attending company social events not as Cole's marginalized wife, but as a friendly face interested in company history. Retired executives loved sharing stories about Richard's early years, their reminiscences often revealing information about their estate planning and succession concerns. "My kids have no interest in the business," confided Margaret Willis during the annual summer barbecue. She'd been Richard's secretary for 30 years before retiring with a substantial stock package. "Honestly, I've been thinking about selling. The dividend income is nice, but I'd rather have liquidity for my grandchildren's education." I filed this information carefully, along with similar comments from a dozen other minority shareholders. When the time came, Marcus would approach each one through intermediaries, offering prices slightly above market value for quick private sales. By month 6, I controlled 47% of Morrison & Associates through a network of entities so complex that even sophisticated forensic accounting would require weeks to trace ownership back to me. Cole and Isabel combined held their 80% through direct inheritance, never imagining that someone might be quietly accumulating enough shares to challenge their control. The irony was exquisite. While they celebrated their leadership transition with champagne toasts and magazine interviews, I was systematically acquiring the power to make their positions entirely ceremonial. They thought they'd marginalized me into irrelevance. Instead, they'd given me the motivation and freedom to buy their company out from under them. 4% remained. 4% between their arrogance and my absolute control. And I knew exactly where to find it. The final 4% came from an unexpected source. Richard himself. 3 days before the board meeting, while organizing his personal effects that Cole had been avoiding for months, I discovered a safety deposit box key taped inside his antique desk drawer. The bank records showed the box had been opened regularly until the week before his death, suggesting whatever lay inside held ongoing importance. The contents made my blood run cold and my strategy complete. Stock certificates. Original paper shares from Morrison & Associates founding, never digitized or recorded in modern systems. 4% of the company held in Richard's personal name, separate from his estate distribution. Along with them, a letter in his distinctive handwriting dated just 2 weeks before his death. If Vanessa is reading this, my succession plan has failed. These shares represent insurance, protection for the person I trust most to preserve what I built. Use them wisely. He'd known. Somehow, Richard had foreseen his children's capacity for betrayal and prepared a contingency that would take me from puppet to puppet master in a single revelation. The board meeting email went out at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, time to arrive when people checked messages with their morning coffee. Professional, unremarkable, the kind of routine communication that wouldn't raise suspicions. Subject: structural change proposal. All board members and executive staff are requested to attend an emergency meeting today at 2 p.m. in the main conference room. Thank you, Vanessa Morrison. I signed it with my married name. The first time in months I'd used Morrison instead of my maiden name on official correspondence. Let them think I was finally accepting my diminished place in their hierarchy. Cole's response came within minutes. What's this about? We didn't discuss any structural changes. I didn't reply. By noon, the building buzzed with speculation. Administrative staff whispered in hallways about the mysterious meeting called by the boss's wife. Department heads cleared their schedules, curious about what domestic drama might spill into corporate governance. Marcus arrived at 1:30, his presence adding gravitas to what others assumed would be amateur theater. He carried a leather briefcase that contained documents 6 months in the making, share transfer records, voting proxy agreements, corporate restructuring proposals that would fundamentally alter Morrison & Associates' power dynamics. You ready for this? He asked, setting up files at the head of the conference table. I've been ready since they asked me to fetch their first cup of coffee. The board members filed in with varying degrees of curiosity and annoyance. Harold Brennan, who'd unknowingly sold me my first shares, nodded politely. Margaret Willis clutched her purse nervously, sensing something significant without understanding what. The independent directors looked professionally skeptical. They'd seen family drama destroy companies before. Cole arrived 7 minutes late, his hair still damp from what was probably an extended gym session. He moved with the casual arrogance of someone who believed his presence was required but not urgent, that whatever his wife had planned could be managed with minimal attention. Isabel followed 30 seconds later, her entrance choreographed for maximum impact. Designer heels clicked against marble floors as she carried an oversized latte and wore the kind of smirk reserved for watching amateur performances. She dressed for victory. Power suit, statement jewelry, makeup applied with television-ready precision. Sorry I'm late, she announced to no one in particular, settling into the chair that had once been mine. Traffic was absolutely brutal. She leaned toward the board member beside her, stage whispering just loud enough for me to hear. Did you bring cookies this time, Vanessa? Or should we order catering for whatever presentation you've prepared? Scattered chuckles rippled around the table. The same people who'd once respected my strategic insights now viewed me as entertainment. A housewife playing at business while the real leaders indulged her fantasies. I remained silent, hands folded in my lap, watching their amusement with the patience of a predator waiting for prey to move within striking distance. All right, let's get started, Cole said, consulting his Rolex with practiced importance. I've got a client call at 3, so let's keep this focused. Vanessa, you called this meeting. What structural changes are you proposing? He spoke to me like a teacher addressing a particularly slow student, his tone mixing tolerance with mild irritation. Around the table, 14 pairs of eyes fixed on me with expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed boredom. I stood slowly, my movements deliberate and calm. The room's attention sharpened slightly, not because they expected substance, but because standing suggested I might actually have prepared remarks rather than emotional rambling. Before we begin, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room, I'd like to introduce my legal counsel. Marcus rose from his position near the door, briefcase in hand, his presence transforming the atmosphere from family meeting to corporate battlefield. Board members straightened in their chairs as he moved to the table's head, distributing thick folders with surgical precision. Marcus Chin, Meridian Capital Partners, he announced, placing documents in front of each attendee. Representing the interests of Morrison and Associates' new majority shareholder. Cole's face shifted from mild annoyance to sharp attention. New majority shareholder? What are you talking about? I locked eyes with my husband, the man who'd shared my bed while dismantling my career, who'd promised partnership while orchestrating my exile, who'd underestimated me so completely that he'd handed me the tools for his own destruction. Effective immediately, I said, my voice steady as surgical steel, I am the majority shareholder of Morrison and Associates. The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder, that breathless pause before the world explodes. Isabel's latte cup slipped from her manicured fingers, ceramic shattering against marble in a splash of caffeine and cream that stained her pristine suit. The sound broke the spell, releasing a cascade of shocked exclamations and frantic paper rustling as board members scrambled through the documentation Marcus had provided. That's impossible, Cole breathed, his face draining of color as he scanned share transfer records that proved otherwise. You don't own any stock in this company. I own 51%, I corrected, producing Richard's final gift, the original certificates that completed my acquisition. As of this morning when the last transaction cleared. Marcus began distributing a second set of documents, these sealed in legal envelopes marked with individual names. Employment termination notices, drafted by the city's most expensive labor attorneys, legally bulletproof and immediately effective. Mr. Cole Morrison, I said, handing him his envelope with steady hands. Ms. Isabel Morrison, your services are no longer required. The room erupted in chaos, shouting voices, scraping chairs, the sound of absolute power changing hands in real time. But I remained perfectly calm, finally speaking from a position of strength they could never take away. The chaos in the boardroom lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds before security escorted Cole and Isabel from the building. I watched through the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows as they stood on the sidewalk, still clutching their termination letters, their faces shifting between disbelief and rage. Cole's phone buzzed incessantly, probably calls from department heads seeking clarification, clients demanding explanations, reporters who'd already caught wind of the dramatic leadership change. But those conversations would happen without him now. The building access cards have been deactivated, Marcus informed me quietly, consulting his tablet. Legal has filed all necessary documentation with the state. HR is prepared to brief remaining staff on the transition. I nodded, my attention focused on the remaining board members who sat in stunned silence around the mahogany table. These were Richard's old allies, people who'd built their careers alongside his vision. Their loyalty belonged to the company's legacy, not to his children's incompetence. I know this is sudden, I addressed them directly, but I want to assure you that Morrison and Associates will continue honoring the principles Richard established. The difference is that we'll actually live up to them. Harold Brennan cleared his throat nervously. What exactly are your plans for leadership restructuring? I'm glad you asked. The appointments I'd planned during 6 months of quiet preparation began immediately. By Thursday morning, 3 extraordinary women occupied the executive offices that Cole and Isabel had treated as personal kingdoms. Dr. Sarah Chin, no relation to Marcus, became Chief Operating Officer. She'd been Morrison's head of international development until Isabel had her reassigned to special projects, for the crime of disagreeing with a particularly disastrous market expansion plan. Sarah held dual PhDs in economics and international business, spoke 5 languages fluently, and had generated over $40 million in revenue before being sidelined. I thought my career here was finished, Sarah confided during our first executive meeting, her relief palpable. Isabel made it clear that women who talked back weren't welcome in leadership positions. The second appointment filled me with particular satisfaction. Jennifer Walsh, former head of strategic planning, my old department, had been demoted to junior analyst after questioning Cole's decision to abandon 3 profitable market segments. Her expertise in data-driven strategy was exactly what the company needed to recover from months of ego-driven decision-making. "You want me to rebuild the entire strategic planning division?" Jennifer asked, her voice mixing excitement with disbelief. "I want you to build it better than it ever was," I replied. "With proper resources, proper authority, and zero interference from people who mistake volume for intelligence." The third promotion went to Maria Santos, previously buried in the legal department despite being one of the sharpest corporate attorneys I'd ever encountered. Cole had blocked her advancement repeatedly, claiming she was too aggressive for client-facing roles. Her aggression, I discovered, consisted of actually reading contracts thoroughly and refusing to approve deals that would expose the company to unnecessary liability. Our first executive team meeting felt like stepping into an alternate universe where competence was valued over connections, where ideas mattered more than hierarchy, where women could speak without being interrupted or dismissed. "I want to address the elephant in the room," I said, looking around the conference table that had witnessed my humiliation just days earlier. "This company has been operating below its potential for months. We're going to fix that, but not through revenge or dramatic gestures. We're going to fix it by being better at everything we do." The press release went out that afternoon, crafted with surgical precision to communicate massive change through minimal words. Morrison and Associates announces new leadership structure. Leadership has changed. So will the culture. Industry publications picked up the story within hours. Business Weekly ran a front-page feature titled, "The Silent Takeover: How a Marginalized Wife Became a Power Player." Forbes published an analysis of my acquisition strategy, calling it one of the most sophisticated stealth campaigns in recent corporate history. My phone rang constantly. Interview requests, speaking invitations, job offers from companies impressed by my strategic execution. I ignored them all, focused instead on the painstaking work of rebuilding a corporate culture that had rotted from the top down. Cole's attempts at contact began the second day. Text messages alternating between wounded confusion and righteous anger. "We need to talk about this," followed by, "You can't just destroy our family like this," followed by, "Dad would be ashamed of what you've done." I blocked his number. Isabel's approach was more sophisticated, long emails defending her actions, rewriting history to position herself as the victim of my calculated deception. She painted herself as a grieving daughter trying to honor her father's memory while I, the manipulative outsider, had exploited their vulnerability for personal gain. I forwarded them to our legal team without reading past the first paragraph. The real work began in week 2 when I announced the Morrison Initiative for Women in Business Leadership. The program would provide mentorship, funding, and strategic support for women facing systematic exclusion from family businesses. A problem I discovered was disturbingly common. 60% of family businesses fail by the second generation, I explained to the board of advisors I'd assembled. A significant factor is the tendency to exclude capable family members based on gender rather than competence. We're going to change that. The initiative's first case study walked into our offices 3 weeks later. Amanda Rodriguez, daughter of a third-generation construction company owner, had been relegated to office management while her less qualified brother inherited operational control. Sound familiar? I built the project management system that increased our efficiency by 30%, she told me during our initial consultation. But according to my father, construction isn't women's work. Within 6 months, Amanda had secured funding to launch her own construction management firm, taking 3 major clients and half the skilled workforce with her. Her father's company struggled to replace the expertise he'd systematically undervalued. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked during one of our quarterly reviews, "having the power to reshape an entire industry?" I considered the question while looking out my office window, the same view I'd once enjoyed before being exiled to fetch coffee and clear tables. The difference was that now the power was mine to keep, earned through strategy rather than inherited through birthright. "It doesn't feel like revenge," I said finally. "It feels like justice." Cole eventually stopped calling. Isabel eventually stopped writing. The industry eventually stopped treating my takeover as a curiosity and started recognizing it as a case study in strategic excellence. Morrison and Associates thrived under actual leadership. Our quarterly revenue increased by 28%. Client satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Employee retention improved dramatically once people realized competence was valued over politics. But the real victory wasn't financial. The real victory was walking into boardrooms where my voice mattered, where my expertise was respected, where no one would ever ask me to fetch coffee again. I'd reclaimed more than a company. I'd reclaimed my dignity. And that was worth more than all the stock certificates in the world. If this story of corporate justice had you on the edge of your seat, press that like button right now. My favorite part was when Vanessa revealed she was the majority shareholder and handed out those termination letters with ice-cold precision. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering revenge stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.